I'm Kerry Bowers, and I approve this message.
Greetings. As a presidential candidate, I have a responsibility to the American people to inform them of my position with respect to the threats we face and what they may expect as my response to a given threat. One of those threats I identified early in my campaign was the terrorist threat, a threat that may come from within our nation's borders as well as from without, and perpetrated by self-serving ideologues whose warped ideologies infect the hearts and minds of those who, for whatever reason, will lend them a receptive ear. In the time since I wrote that statement, we have seen yet another dramatic escalation of the threat, one postured against the freedoms Americans hold dear, as well as those freedoms held dear by the people of other nations. While the threat may identify itself as Muslim, it is clear that it is of a sect that reserves no respect for other than that which it declares to be the truth or the law. In consideration of these facts, it is prudent that I readdress this issue and attempt to remove any doubt as to my response to a threat, and specifically one that targets those who do not submit to their religious sect or any other form of tyrannically imposed ideology. What I will address in this presentation is the broader operational strategy and not that which may disclose the tactics to be used in order that the elements of surprise and time are reserved to our advantage. I will add, though, all measures I would employ will be well within the constitutional authority of this government and done so in order that the safeguards to our individual freedoms are preserved and not diminished as a consequence of engaging a threat attempting to seize from us the very same liberties we could deprive of ourselves through other than constitutional measures. I will add, too, the strategy I address in this presentation is the one that will be employed when a declaration of war is not the more appropriate response, as would be applicable to a threat imposed by a sovereign nation. I want to make entry into this issue by first addressing the labeling of the threat, one that has arisen from a tyrannical application of Islam and one that, in this case, has no national identity. I will say, too, that unlike my predecessors, I will not engage in ideological or semantical argument as to what this threat should be labeled, when by its very actions, an appropriate label, one with legal standing, can be applied and suitable under all similar circumstances. I believe the words terror and terrorist, and in whatever language they are translated, are labels that have become romanticized by renegade bands of thugs and their patsies who find a macabre delight in terrorizing the world with their heinous crimes. The words terror and terrorist are, in my opinion, inappropriate terms to label the acts and the actors engaged in such evil, for they are words descriptive of the consequences of the actors and their actions, and both subject to broad interpretation. Additionally, the descriptors extremist and radical are inappropriate too, as they fail to identify the specific action of the actors and are likewise subject to broad interpretation. Therefore, if I am chosen by the people to command the forces of this nation and share a leadership position in the global battle against renegades who choose to impart their will and in any form contrary to the laws of this nation or that of our allies, then I shall do so labeling those who commit such violations as criminals and their acts as crimes. Furthermore, we will not accommodate any criminal entity void of recognized sovereignty by addressing them as they desire, but by that which the United States or our allies shall so designate them. A preferable designation will be a two-letter identifier, CE, meaning criminal element, followed by two letters that signify the geographical origin of the criminal sect, and then additional suffixes as necessary to further refine the sect's description to meet U.S. and allied nation offensive and counteroffensive requirements. For example, a criminal element originating in Syria would be designated as CESY01, as opposed to that we would address the army of a nation, which would be recognized by their nationality as with the Syrian army. The proposed labeling of the individuals and the organizations they construct will not alter the means by which we will engage a threat, for we will use all means at our disposal to efficiently and effectively divide what is nothing less than a threat to all humanity as posed by criminals who recognize no boundary to their acts of criminal incivility. In that previous statement, I alluded to my strategy for engaging the threat when I used the word divide, a word whose letters are the acronym for the broad strategy I would employ. It is my belief we will not totally eradicate or transform all those vulnerable mindset to such criminality, but we certainly can reduce its breadth and depth through a process of dividing it. My broad strategy then will be to detect the threat, identify the threat, verify the threat, isolate the threat, deter the threat through demoralization, disruption, and/or destruction, and then exit, whereupon the process is repeated. Detection will be accomplished through all the various human and technological means available to this nation and that offered by our allies. In the United States, and as previously implied, the detection process will be accomplished within the authority and constraints of the Constitution and is further defined by the Fourth Amendment. The public, too, will be called upon to assist in this element of the strategy, which will be made more productive as a consequence of public education programs focused on the recognition and appropriate reporting procedures for potential threats. The identification phase of the strategy will occur subsequent to detection and will begin the process of bringing to bear the intelligence and surveillance measures necessary to confirm a potential threat. In addition to identifying the individual tactical elements of the adversary, which is likely the first elements to be detected, we will work backwards from the same to identify the command and control, logistical, and financial elements that may exist to support those designated to execute the criminal action. It will be during this phase that the threat is named according to the previously explained process and the information shared as appropriate with our allies. Verification begins when all the desired elements of identification have been reasonably exhausted and the focus transitions to confirming the data and putting together the best possible description of the threat and the elements from which it draws its support. It will be from this description that the next two phases of the strategy are developed. So, it is critically important we have a clear understanding of the threat, its breadth and depth, and accomplished in order that we most efficiently and effectively employ our offensive and counteroffensive resources. The next phase of the strategy, the isolation phase, actually signals our readiness, as well as that of our allies, to begin planning for the deterrence phase. Isolation will be target-specific and can range in scope from that of a single individual to perhaps a sovereign nation. The focus will be on defining the extent to which we can gain isolation and the appropriate deterrent measure that will best support the desired outcome. Included among our considerations at this point will be the potential harm to innocents, collateral damage of physical structures, consequences subsequent to effective execution, and, among many others, the consequences subsequent to a failed execution. Once the best isolation condition has been chosen and the parameters subsequently achieved within acceptable limits, then the deterrence phase will be implemented. Deterrence parameters will include the extent and duration the measure or measures are anticipated to be employed, which in turn establishes the conditions for the final phase of the strategy, that being the exit. Non-lethal deterrence can range from an arrest, conviction, and incarceration of an individual up to the imposition of devastating sanctions upon a nation and any other nation who collaborates with the same in violation of the restrictions imposed by the United States and our allies. Where the non-lethal range of restrictions either cannot be implemented or provide the desired remedy, then the threat will be targeted for elimination, and that elimination will be carried out anywhere the threat may choose to reside for what will prove to be a temporary residence. That brings us to the exit phase, the final phase of the application of the strategy against a threat to which the previous phases have been applied. Unlike those cases in which war was declared and it becomes a moral obligation of the victor to restore some semblance of government and domestic tranquility among the surrendered peoples, the same will not be applied in this strategy. In this case, we seek only the elimination of a specific threat and leave to the people the responsibility to maintain or restore order from what remains subsequent to the elimination of a threat to the United States and her allies. We will not engage in any form of policing action as has been conducted for far too long in Iraq and Afghanistan, and principally because of the conflict that has and will continue to exist between the ideologies of the West versus those of the Middle East. This is not to say we will not support Middle Eastern nations and in ways we engage with other nations of the world, but we will do so as a government from the outside and not from the inside. I would leave to the nation to welcome private enterprise and not-for-profit operations that may best serve their respective needs from within and do so with security provided by the host rather than with the expectation it will come from this nation or our allies. Moving to the issue of captives, in those instances where a judiciary is absent or insufficient for appropriate adjudication of criminals captured on foreign soil, we will work with our allies to create an international tribunal through which the captives will be promptly adjudicated and punished or released as directed by the court. Those captured within the United States will be adjudicated in accordance with the applicable military or civil law for the jurisdiction in which the crime took place. Holding persons captive indefinitely because of a fear of recidivism is beyond the ideals of American justice and not, in my opinion, acceptable. Criminal recidivism is rampant in the United States, and it is a result we have come to accept as a consequence of a nation made exceptional in part by its exceptional justice system, one to which we will apply as appropriate to those captured abroad as well as to those apprehended upon U.S. soil. It is simply a risk we must take, as with all risks that come with a profoundly great system of freedom and democracy like that we enjoy and are to preserve for future generations. When I began writing this presentation, I was drawn back to memories of Desert Storm, and particularly those nights when I was part of the Defense Suppression Forces escorting B-52s whose targets were Iraqi-held positions. As I watched those displays of military might and whose effects turned night almost into day, my thoughts turned to pity for those upon whom such power was now being released. Why pity? Because I knew that many, if not most, of those cowering in their bunkers faced not only a threat from those now engaging them from above, but also from the rifle in their back, as posed by the evil that placed them there at this moment in their lives. And, as God is my witness, I was relieved when, at the cessation of hostilities, I saw so many Iraqis come out of those bunkers and without resistance surrender themselves to what they knew, just as I knew, to be a compassionate captor, one of grace and mercy, and through whom they knew they were saved, something they knew they never would have enjoyed had evil prevailed. I tell you this because I pray to a loving, merciful, forgiving God that my words will touch one who may be thinking of resorting to what I call subjugated criminality, and who may do so as a means of belonging and identifying with something they interpret as a rightful fight. I assure you, it is not, and it never will be. It is only evil, and evil that will eventually bring your destruction, and destruction is likely, or more so, to come from those whom you believe to be your companions in crime than from those who oppose the warped ideology you unwisely chose to pledge your life. You see, evil feeds upon itself, and it is always looking to see that which is attempting to best it, and it will do all that is necessary to eradicate any potential opposition in its infancy. If you become too popular, too well-voiced, or even show your approval of other than that which is in control at the moment, then your life will likely be in jeopardy, and those too of the lives whom you love. Remember, evil has no boundaries. There is no law. There is no compassion, and because this is so, you will be forever fearful of your life and for the lives of those you hold dear. If you want to be loved and genuinely respected, and want the same for the God you proclaim, then you can only achieve those ends by extending the same to all people. In closing, I want to make it very clear to every American, if I am called to lead this nation in the fight against either domestic or foreign threats, Be they criminal Muslim sects or any other, I will do so with a resolve and pursuit perhaps unmatched to this point by any American president. I believe that the number one priority of the federal government, and the very reason the same was created, is to protect, preserve, and defend this great union and the people who are counted among its citizens. That is the priority to which I pledged my life over a 30-year military career, the same to which I would pledge my life again as your executive servant. I thank you for your kind attention to this message.